In this video, we're going to review a strategy for adding and subtracting fractions with unlike denominators. That means the two fractions we're adding or subtracting will have different denominators. So the learning target is I can add and subtract fractions with unlike denominators. The strategy we're going to review is called the PMES method. This should be an easy method for you to remember because you go to Pembroke Meadows Elementary School. So the P stands for problem. That just means we're going to write the problem. The M stands for multiples, which means you're going to list the multiples of the denominators of both of your fractions and then find the least common denominator. That means the multiple that your two fractions have in common. The E stands for equivalent, and that means you're going to find equivalent fractions using the LCD, or least common denominator, as your denominator. The S stands for solve and simplify. That just means you're going to add or subtract your new fractions and then simplify your answer if possible. In order to understand what all of the steps of this strategy mean, we're going to look at a few examples. So the first example we're going to look at is when we first write the problem, 2/5 plus 3/10. So the reason why we can't just add these, because this is what 2/5 looks like and this is what 3/10 looks like. And it's difficult for us to put those together and see what actually the answer would be because the size of each piece is different. So we have to look at 2/5 plus 3/10 and review a strategy for solving this on paper. The M stands for multiples. So what we're going to do is list the multiples of the denominators and then find the least common denominator. So if I'm going to list my multiples over here, I'm going to start by first listing the denominators. I have 5 and 10. So first we're going to start with the first multiple of each of those denominators. So we're going to multiply each number by 1. So 5 times 1 is 5 and 10 times 1 is 10. So far, I don't see any multiples that they have in common, so let's continue. Next, we're going to multiply each denominator by 2. 5 times 2 is 10, and 10 times 2 is 20. So already, I have my multiples of 5 is 5, 10. The multiples of 10 is 10 and 20, and I can see that they have one multiple in common. And as soon as I see that they have a multiple in common, I can stop listing the multiples. So the multiple they have in common is 10. 5 is 10, or 10 is 5 times 2, and 10 is also 10 times 1. So our LCD, or our least common denominator, is going to be 10. Next, we're going to find equivalent fractions with the LCD as the denominator. So that just means we're going to find fractions that are equivalent to our first two fractions, 2/5 and 3/10, that have 10 as the denominator. So I'm going to rewrite these fractions vertically so that I can easily write my equivalent fractions next to them. So I have 2/5 plus 3/10, and what I need to do is set up a new fraction next to each of those original fractions with 10 as the denominator. So I'm going to start with the fraction on the top, 2/5. So what do I do to 5 to get 10? That's the first question I'm asking. And I know from my chart up here, I know that I do 5 times 2, and that gives me 10. So whatever you do to the denominator, you have to do the same thing to the numerator. So I'm going to have to multiply my numerator also by 2. And 2 times 2 is 4. Now, to have a visual of how these two fractions are equal, this is what they would look like. This up here is 2/5, and this one down here is 4/10. And from this picture, you can see that they're actually the same part of the whole. It's just that the size of the pieces are a little bit different. Next, we're going to look at 3/10. We need to find an equivalent fraction with 10 as the denominator. This one's pretty easy because 3/10 already has 10 as the denominator, but we're still going to walk through the steps. So I know 10 times 1 is 10, and 3 times 1, because remember, whatever you have to do to the denominator, you also have to do to the numerator. 3 times 1 is going to be 3. So now what I'm left with is 4/10 plus 3/10, which is the same as 2/5 plus 3/10 because 2/5 and 4/10 are equivalent. So next, we actually have to solve and simplify meaning we add or subtract our new fractions, which are 4/10 and 3/10, and then simplify our answer if possible. So 4/10 plus 3/10, first I start by adding my numerators, and 4 plus 3 is 7. But remember, we keep the denominator because when we add fractions, we're not changing the size of the pieces, we're just adding the denominator, or adding the numerators and then keeping the denominator. So I end up with 7/10. Now I can't simplify 7/10 because 7 and 10 don't have any factors in common other than 1, so 7/10 is my final answer.